Greetings and welcome to another edition of the Pedalshift Project. The Pedalshift Project is a series of conversations, thoughts, and experiments around the bike touring lifestyle. From tips and tricks to ideas on how to ride your ride. Let's shrink the world by bike. Show notes and more are available at pedalshift.net/091, and you can email me at the show, pedalshift@pedalshift.net, or you can call the voicemail hotline at 202-930-1109, and check Pedalshift out on all the socials as well. Very happy episode 91 to everyone, celebrating the 90s here at Pedalshift. 1991, I think that was a terrible music year. I think it was transitioning, right? We're just about ready to get to some really cool music, but 91, I can't remember. All I know is maybe there was some Color Me Bad. Remember them? They were terrible. Now, of course, if you were a former member of Color Me Bad and listened to the show, I deeply apologize. I'm going to go with the numbers on this and suggest that maybe you aren't. Hello, everybody. I'm Tim Mooney. I'm back again for ostensibly a show about bicycle touring, despite the fact that I start off by talking about Color Me Bad, apparently. We've got a great show for you. It is really all about you. This is a show that's going to be talking about all of the various different summer bicycle tours, or I shouldn't say all of them, many of them that you've written in about and called in about, which is really exciting. Getting to play some voicemails. So we'll get kicked off on that. We will get kicked off. I will kick this off in a second. I wanted to throw out a couple of bit of housekeeping items before we get rolling. Number one, a reminder that I'm going to be doing the Pacific Coast Tour again, Newport, Oregon to San Francisco this October. And stay tuned in September and October pods, and of course the newsletters as well, for special edition pod information, all sorts of different stuff that you get as a subscriber to the newsletter. If you are not signed up, I would recommend you do sign up. Go to the website, pedalshift.net, link in the show notes at pedalshift.net/091 as well. Sign up. It's free. You get all sorts of cool stuff as a result of that, and I think that you'll dig it. I got some cool ideas for coming up, and of course, it's a great ride, and I love talking about it, and you'll hear about it, of course, here on the main show, the Pedalshift Project, as well. I, obviously, celebrating the 90s, this is sort of the March to episode 100, and I am not a huge round number episode guy. Episode 50, I think I kind of reflected a little bit on it, as just sort of a milestone. I think episode 100, we're going to do something a little bit fun, and I do have something special that is lining up for it. First and foremost, something that I can definitely announce is that special guests, friends of the show, Brock Dittis and Aaron Flores from the Sprocket podcast, they're going to be special guests. We'll chat about all of our usual nonsense, and that's going to be one thing. But there's more. We're looking to do a joint meetup between the two shows / holiday spectacular live and in person this December in Portland, Oregon. Mark the first weekend in December if you are in Portland, or if you are Portland adjacent, or if you are interested in maybe joining us that first weekend. Hold that. More details to come. We're some of the ideas here are pretty dope. I'm just saying. I don't know. I don't want to oversell it right now, but it's feeling pretty good. So at least some kind of a meetup is going to be happening, and maybe something a little bit more around episode 100. So more to come on that in future episodes. Mark your calendar, first weekend in December. One last thing about housekeeping, and that is the schedule. I said my and like a Western New Yorker, and it's fantastic. The next week is an off week, as normal. Many of you have noticed the rhythm of the show for 2017, and it's been 3 weeks on, 1 week off. That's been basically the rhythm that I've been in, and it's been great, and it's worked out really well. I've got a couple of weeks coming up where I'll be taking an additional off week between now and the end of the year. I'm going to be straight honest with you. Part of that is to time episode 100 to fit a little bit better, but there's also some travel involved. There's the October tour that's happening, of course, and my ability to do a show in the middle of a multi-week tour is a little bit limited. But don't worry, plenty of episodes to come. It might just be an extra off week or two between now and the end of the year. I'll let you all know when that happens. Next up on the show, as promised in the journal, talking about your summer tours for 2017. And I have to say, I mentioned this last episode, but I just had a huge growth in the number of people writing in talking about their style of bike riding, the types of tours they're on. Some of you are sharing your plans for tours that you are just excited to get on. And it's just fantastic. And I really wanted to be able to turn around and share that with the rest of the community because there's so much great stuff that's out there going on. So this is just a small sampling of the variety of people that have written in or called in, or hit me up on social or whatever. And I'm planning on, for those of you who have written in subsequently or you're continuing to write in, I'm going to be sharing this type of stuff really all through maybe the fall and into the winter, because the winter months are a little bit trickier for sort of talking about bicycle touring so much. And so it'll be nice to have a little bit of retrospective for some of your stories that have been out there. So I'm really excited to share all of your stories. So please keep writing in pedalshift@pedalshift.net. Hit me up on socials, whatever works for you. Oh, the hotline. I would really love the voicemail hotline as well. Apparently you get 3 minutes to tell your story. This is what I'm learning. Thank you, Google. All right, let's start off and kick this summer tour session off with Greg in Santa Cruz talking about credit card touring the Oregon coast. I want you to go read, and I've got the link in the show notes, to Greg's Crazy Guy on a Bike journal. Now, for those of you who aren't familiar with Crazy Guy on a Bike, it's sort of the OG bike touring website. It is basically a place that it's built for you to be able to create your own journal. And it's done so simply and so well. I just love going to it because people are just putting up all sorts of cool stuff on there. And Greg is certainly one of them. One thing that you'll find on these journals is that there's a whole variety of different ways of telling their story. Some are super detailed and full of pictures, and Greg's is a little bit more kind of general overview, but that's kind of its charm, I think. Greg took an Amtrak up from San Jose, California to Portland and saw some of the traditional bikey podcast sites. We're talking your Southeast Division and 12th Beer Mongers site. We're talking VeloCult, the highlights. He also tackled the Portland to Tillamook ride, which I'm going to be frank, even most Portlanders don't do. They usually take the Max, the light rail, out to the western end, and then they'll start bicycling from there. So good on you, Greg, for taking on the West Hills of Portland. Most people say no to that. They just sort of take the fast forward. So it's awesome that you did it. Greg took a chunk of the coast that I did last summer and did it as his ride. So I want to remind you, go check out Pedalshift Tour Journals Volume 7, I believe it is, Oregon Coast, for some audio of how I did that ride to supplement your reading from his Crazy Guy on a Bike journal. I noticed Greg gave Pedalshift a shout out for naming the book, which is, I believe its actual title is Bicycling the Pacific Coast. It's that purple book, if you're familiar with the book. I'm not sure I can really take credit for giving it its name, but I know I've said it about 73 bajillion times on the pod, so maybe, who knows? I think that you should go check out Greg's journal and also consider riding the Oregon coast. I know I do it just about every year. Maybe you should too. Go check that out. Next up, we've got Paul Staten on Trail Angels in Oregon. And this one, I'm going to read his email because it's a great story. And I think it really illustrates what can be fantastic about bicycle touring. And that's who you run into on tour. So Paul writes, a couple months back, work took me to Portland for a science conference. By the way, we're back in Portland in Oregon again. No, not a coincidence, I don't think. I was itching to rent a bicycle and go for a longer ride up the Columbia River Gorge, but my conference ended the evening one day and I flew out the afternoon of the next, so I didn't have a good single block of time. But I just so happened to have a sleeping pad and blanket with me, and I'd recently started reading some of Tom Allen's stuff and decided to just ride up the canyon in the evening and try really hard to make it back in time for my flight. Worst case, I would have to eat a couple $100, and I decided to rather do that than always wonder what the adventure would have been like. Love that. I rented an old bike from the folks at Everybody's Bike Rentals and Tours. It was about $50 overnight. The frame wasn't long enough, the bike lights were cheap, and the saddle was terrible, and I was wearing basketball shorts. But the bike was sound. I didn't know where I was going to sleep, but I took a train to the 99th Street Mall and started biking east along the river from there. You sound like you're pretty familiar with Portland and its surroundings, so you probably know all I saw on my way up past Multinomah Falls. Beautiful, right? But it was already getting on towards dark by the time I got to the mouth of the gorge, somewhere around Troutdale, he was saying. So I was a little nervous. I kept looking for places I could tuck in and hide for the night. I passed by a pair of cyclists who were shopping and waved hello, wondering if I should have stopped to chat. But of course I was nervous and stopping somewhere, and I didn't feel like pestering them about it. Later, while checking out some falls, they passed me. I noticed that they were slower than I was. They were packed for a few days. So I decided to try to catch up, ride close to their brighter lights, and ask where to camp. We chatted for a while, and they showed me up the canyon a good ways further than I would have dared to go in the dark on my own, right to a state park with one of Oregon's amazing hiker-biker stops. I had learned that Portland is great for cyclists. I didn't realize that Oregon as a whole is incredible. I rolled out my mat, kept warm enough to sleep with my blanket, and made my mattress and the grass my bed. I would expect a couple of women cyclists to be wary of a man catching up and being all friendly on the road, but they were totally cool. I had to leave camp early in the morning to catch my flight, and I didn't wake them, but I wish I could thank Oregon riders Sally and Delta for being my trail angels and helping me out on my first S240. What a great story, Paul. I think that that's such a typical experience that you run into people that will lend you a hand, especially if you're going by the same conveyance. You know, if you're on a bike, they're on a bike. Everybody's kind of there to help each other out, I find, in my experience. Paul has an additional question for all of you people in the Pedalshift hive mind. Does anyone have a similar overnight? We call them S240s, sub 24-hour overnights. In the Boulder, Colorado area. I assume there's tons. He's going to be traveling out there and wanted to know if anybody's got an idea, all you Coloradans and Colorado adjacent types out there. If you shoot a note over at pedalshift@pedalshift.net, I will shoot that along to Paul. Paul, thanks for sharing that. That is a great story. And I promise everyone, the next one is not based in Oregon or Portland. It is farther away from that. We're going to talk about Iceland Johnston and Pedalshift Society member Caleb Jenkinson touring England and Scotland. So Iceland writes, and Iceland, again, my pronunciations, as everybody knows, are a little challenged. I'm hoping that I'm pronouncing your name correctly. Anyways, Iceland writes, I thought you might like to know our method of getting out. It is not too dissimilar to your own. We live in North Yorkshire, just outside of Leeds, so we ride to York, about 25 miles. By the way, miles, not kilometers. Did the conversion for me, the kilometer challenge. Thank you. Catch the train up to Edinburgh. Edinburgh? Is it Edinburgh? Sorry, I'm terrible with this. Edinburgh. I think it's Edinburgh. Change trains to Aberdeen, get the Northlink ferry to the Shetlands, spend 6 days in the Shetlands, get the ferry to the Orkneys. These are all islands for those of you unfamiliar. 3 days on the Orkneys, ferry back to the mainland, train from Thurso down to Inverness, then Edinburgh, then York, then ride home. When you book train tickets, you have to book spaces for your bikes, and it's roll-on service. And even then, you have to get there early in case someone is there ahead of you. You can usually get on if you have booked the spot, but some runs are first come, first serve, so it depends on how pushy you are. And I read just that portion of Island's email because I thought that it was a really great example of folks who travel in a way that really utilizes mass transit as a piece of it. And Europe can be a wonderful place, but there's always a little bit of quirk. So if you're not familiar with your transit systems when you're going over there, or any place, really, it could be in South Asia, it could be any place in the States, Canada, wherever, find out ahead of time, preferably from someone who's local, because that's some really good information. What incredible sites. I've got pics in the show notes. You can check that out, pedalshift.net/091 from Caleb and Aislin's past journeys. And what a great sounding tour. I would love to get to that part of the world at some point. One of I think the bucket list ones that are on my list is circumnavigating Ireland, but I'm really attracted also to Scotland, Northern England, the islands, all these other places. Sounds really great as well in the UK. So very, very intriguing tour, and I'm looking forward to hearing more about it in the future. Thanks, Aislinn, for sharing. And Caleb, of course, thank you for supporting the show as well. All right, next up, we've got Rob calling in from South Korea.
Hey, Tim. My name's Rob. I'm calling out of South Korea currently. I'm doing the Korea cross-country cycling road tour. It consists of about 4 different major rivers, ranging from about, 400 kilometers to 600 kilometers each. I just wanted to thank you for putting on such a great show. Really enjoyed listening to it. And I just wanted to give you a shout out from way over here. It's pretty hot. It's about 35 degrees Celsius with about 80% humidity, and it's about 9 a.m., 10 a.m., so it's going to get hotter. I hope you have a good summer of rides, and keep up the good work on the podcast. Thank you. Bye.
Rob, thanks so much for calling in. That is awesome. Not only was that one of my first voicemails, but to get that from somebody who's on tour internationally, that was pretty special. So thanks so much for that. South Korea is hot. I lived at trivia. Have I talked about this on the show? I lived in Japan way back in the mid 80s. And I do remember that Asia can get a special kind of hot. And at least in the parts that I went to now, I never got a chance to go to South Korea. That is definitely someplace that I would like to go to. And I'm excited that you are bike touring there. And I look forward to hearing more about your tours in the future. Thanks for calling in. And I'm excited to share yet another voicemail from the voicemail hotline. Folks, it's time. It's time for you to call. Call the voicemail hotline. It's 202-930-1109. It's there. You got a 3-minute limit. And unfortunately, I believe that this created a bit of a problem for our next caller, Mark, calling from Iceland.
Hey, Tim. This is Mark. I said in my review that I would call the number, so I'm calling now and leaving a voicemail about my trip to Iceland. So it started with 3 of us going to Iceland, and actually it started with 4 of us all going to Iceland on fat bikes to do a month-long tour of there. And then one of them dropped out like 2 months before scheduled departure. No big deal. And then so the 3 of us went to Iceland, and we spent a few days together. And the 2 other people decided at that point not to want to cycle as much as, I guess they weren't planning on cycling as much as I was planning on cycling. They wanted to do more bus transit and stuff like that. So everyone kind of went their separate ways, I should say. So anyways, I ended up pretty much touring Iceland by myself for the whole month, except for the 3 days. But it was amazing. I mean, it was a blast. I had a fat bike, and so I was able to. There was no roads or route that was off limits. So it was really awesome in that aspect to be able to go everywhere and have everything on what I needed. And it was more of a bike packing setup, which I really am happy I had that rather than the traditional pannier stuff because of the wind. The wind was insane. It was the most wind I've ever been in my life, and that's the one thing I will always remember about Iceland is it's windy. And the weather's great, never gets dark. Camping is expensive, food is expensive, everything's expensive. So unless you're independently wealthy, I would not truly recommend it for anybody, but I would at the same time because it forces you to really tighten up your budget and figure out different ways to make it all work, do more wild camping and not use so many resources and sticking off the beaten path a little bit. But it's pretty awesome. I definitely got more tours on my mind. I don't know if my wife will let me do them all or my job, but hopefully they'll let me do at least a couple weeks in the future alone, not with a group, because that dynamic just did not really work out that well this time. Maybe it would in the future. It would be, I got a little homesick when I was out there, so it would be nice to do it with a group.
So that was Mark actually not calling from Iceland, but calling about Iceland. And a few thoughts on that, Mark. Number one, I think that group dynamics is always an interesting thing. I think I even talked about it on the last episode of the pod. I did a larger group tour as sort of my first real big ride. But I was reminded on Facebook today, because I'm getting up towards some, I guess, anniversary date. You know how Facebook reminds you of certain life events. I was doing some tune-up tours, mini tours, 2-day tours long before that. So I think I got used to actually riding alone when I first started bicycle touring. And then when I was in the group dynamic, I tend to be more extroverted in almost every single facet of my life. But I found that with that group, I was really aligned with everybody. Everybody seemed very cool. We were all very like-minded. But for whatever reason, I found that I didn't enjoy cycling with people as much as I thought I would. And certainly my inner introvert, that little piece of me, really comes to the fore when I do bicycle touring. It's much more meditative approach for me. So to find yourself wanting to be alone in bicycle touring, I think is not atypical at all. I'm also, I find myself in contrast reading things like the Facebook bicycle touring group. That's really excellent. If you're not a member of that, I would really recommend joining. It's some great information there. There are a lot of folks that are on there that are saying, hey, I'm going to go on this trip, but I'm looking for people to join me. And that's not how I am. But a lot of people couldn't imagine doing a bicycle tour without having someone riding with them, even if it's a perfect stranger. So I guess the bottom line is there's all sorts of different ways to approach this. And I think if there's ever been one theme through 91 episodes now of the Pedalshift Project, it's, there's not one way to do it. Some people are going to be very specific about how they individually bicycle tour, but you should never say that that's the only way. I find that occasionally I'll run into forum posts, Facebook groups, whatever, where people are very, very opinionated. You must not use technology. You must use technology. You must not do this. You must do that. And I just always kind of shake my head on that, because I feel like we all walk our own path. We all cycle our own route, and you ride your ride. I mean, I talk about, at the top of every show, it's ride your ride. And I think that that's something that you end up discovering along the way, what it is. It sounds like Iceland is a fantastic, beautiful place. I've heard the same thing about the expense. There's always ways to get around that or to minimize that, of course. Sometimes the overall costs for cycling in a particular place may mean that you just got to do a shorter ride. The nice idea is that you've got that checked off your list, so maybe the next one can be a place that's cheaper. South Asia, I understand, is cheaper. Southeast Asia, lots of different places there. You could do it for pretty cheaply in the States, depending on where you're going. There's just lots of good options. My number one favorite thing to do, though, to avoid having to spend a lot of money, is just to go ride into my backyard, basically. I leave here. I'm lucky enough to have one of the great bicycle touring routes in the entire world, literally starting about 1.5 miles away from where I'm sitting right now. And that's pretty great. So, you don't necessarily even need to have that to be able to do that. Just get on your bike and go to some place where you can pitch a tent, or just ride 50 miles and go stay in a hotel. Credit card touring is absolutely viable. I totally am down with that. And so thanks again, Mark, for calling in. And I really encourage everybody, please call in, write in. I would really love to share more of your stories on top of the ones that I just did in this episode. If you would prefer you're just sharing the story with me personally, of course, just let me know. And I would never share anybody's stories that they're not interested in putting out publicly. That's totally fine too. So don't worry about it. Write in if you got questions, things like that as well. You can do it on the hotline. You can email, do whatever. And we're going to do another bunch of shows like this where we share other people's tours and ideas and thoughts and everything. I really would like to get more involvement from you all, because frankly, I learn as much from you as you think you learn from me. I can guarantee that. Trust me on that. We'd like to close out every episode of the Pedalshift Project with a big thank you to all the supporters of the show. If you like what you hear, you can help maintain Pedalshift as an independent, listener-supported voice while expanding the offerings. $5, $2, even $1 a month helps with the cost of hosting the podcast and the website, and you can do it for a bit and cancel anytime. One-shot support is welcome if you're not into the whole small monthly thing. Check it all out and join at pedalshift.net/society. On to the society. Ethan Georgie, Kimberly Wilson, Caleb Jenkinson, Cameron Lane, Andrew McGregor, Michael Hart, Josiah Matthews, Keith Nagel, Brock Dittis, Thomas Skidow, Seth Krieger, Marco Lowe, Terrence Manson, Noah Schroer, Harry Telgadis, John Sikorsky, Richard Killian, Chris Barron, Scott Taylor, Brian Wren, Mark Van Ram, Brad Hipwell, Paul Mulvey, Stuart Buchan, Todd Stutz, Mr. T, Roxy Arning, Nathan Poulton, Harry Hugel, Ferguson Meek, Stephen Dickerson, Vince LaGreco, Ruth Divorcey, Michelle Miller, Matthew Lewis, Michael Baker, Billy Crafton, Paul Culbertson, Scott Culbertson, Matt Perry, Danielle Jepson, and new to this episode, Cody Florchinger. And thank you also to all anonymous and past donors for helping make this show happen. Oh, one more thing before we start playing the out music, that same outro that you have heard for literally 91 episodes. Like, I think I haven't changed it since the very beginning. I know I talk about Jason Kent's album and the cool Sunfields and get, wherever cool music is available and stuff like that. I got one more thing to tell you. Sunfields, Jason Kent's band, the guy who wrote the music that's the theme song for the Pedalshift Project, new album coming out September 15. It is called Mano Mano, and I am telling you, because I am a lucky guy, I get to hear the album long before any of you. But, I strongly encourage you to check out Jason's band's latest release, Mano Mano, September 15th, wherever cool music is available. Okay, now I'm going to play the outro, which will probably change in a couple weeks. Thank you for joining. You can find Pedalshift at pedalshift.net. Lots of great content. You can hear the Pedalshift Project through iTunes or your favorite podcast aggregator. Opening music courtesy of Jason Kent off his debut album. The track is called America. Check out his band Sunfield's latest release, Habitat, wherever cool music is available.